The tension in the air was palpable, and the words landed like a death sentence. "Don't touch me right now." It wasn't a cry of despair or a whispered plea. Rather, it was a carefully rehearsed phrase, as if she had spent a long time in front of a mirror, perfecting the intonation and facial expression. The spoken words made him freeze, his hand hovering in indecision, barely missing her shoulder. In that moment, like a bolt of lightning, the realization struck. There was a chasm between them. 47 days, an eternity, had passed without a single accidental touch. No fleeting brush of fingers when they met, no gentle contact of knees on the couch while watching a movie. Not even the familiar, sleepy embrace in the dim light, foreshadowing awakening, had occurred. Complete, absolute estrangement. She wore that same blue hoodie, a gift from last Christmas, chosen with love and the hope of keeping her warm on winter evenings. A faint scent of shampoo emanated from her damp hair, but there was a strange, unfamiliar note in it. The distinct smell of men's cologne hung in the air, sharp and alien. That scent wasn't his, and the realization settled heavily in his heart. He took a step back, not out of anger, though a sharp ache was already beginning to penetrate every cell of his body. He retreated because he suddenly felt like an uninvited guest, as if he had accidentally walked into someone else's home, where he no longer belonged. The walls were still painted their familiar beige, but now they seemed cold and distant. The kitchen tile still held a chip, a reminder of countless breakfasts cooked together. In the living room, that greasy stain from spilled pad thai 3 years ago was still visible, a testament to their shared clumsiness and carefree laughter. But the woman standing before him, this was no longer the Dasha who once fell asleep on his lap during nature documentaries. This woman seemed like a stranger, clad in a familiar shell. What lay behind this estrangement? What secrets did this change conceal? And could he ever regain the closeness that once existed between them? She turned with feigned indifference and opened the refrigerator door, her movements executed with unflappable calm. "Oat milk's gone," she said, devoid of emotion, not even sparing him a glance. "Could you pick some up tomorrow?" He remained silent. In that moment, his attention was drawn to her phone screen on the kitchen counter, which suddenly flickered to life. The display showed a message preview. "Still thinking about this morning? You're unreal. No name, just a heart emoji." At those words, his heart clenched painfully, as if a ruthless hand had torn it from his chest. She didn't notice he had read it. She seemed not to notice his presence in her field of vision at all. But already outside her personal orbit, he silently walked out the door without a word of goodbye. He passed the mailbox he had so meticulously painted for her birthday, striving to make it a special gift. He passed the car she once mentioned, asking him not to park too close to the hedge. He walked until his legs burned with fatigue, and his throat tightened from the swelling emotions. That night, he slept in the guest room, utterly alone, surrounded by walls that seemed to have absorbed all their unspoken pain. She didn't even inquire about his absence beside her, as if his not being there had become something ordinary, requiring no explanation. The next morning, as if nothing had happened, she posted a picture of her coffee on Instagram, captioning it about "new beginnings." This was the final straw that broke his patience. He was still physically in their house, but she, it seemed, had long since departed their shared life, leaving behind dreams of a future together. It was that day he stopped clinging to the illusions of her return, letting go of the ghosts of the past that had held him captive for so long. Instead, a resolve began to mature within him, to put an end to their story, to draw a definitive line in their relationship. If she thought the phrase, "Don't touch me right now," was the limit, she had no idea what he was capable of when he stopped begging for love and attention. That night, when he so desperately waited for her by the guest room door, she never knocked. He waited like the last naive fool, listening to every sound, hoping to hear some sign that she cared about his presence or absence. He caught every rustle of footsteps, every faint creak of the floorboards in the hallway, any small detail that might indicate her concern. But in response, there was only silence, oppressive, heavy, and humiliating. It enveloped him like a thick, impenetrable fog, only intensifying his feelings of loneliness and abandonment. At 2:14 a.m., he opened his phone and delved into their old messages, trying to find something that might remind him of the times they were together, before their relationship turned lifeless and mechanical. Her past declarations of love sounded sincere and natural, but now they had vanished without a trace. He still remembered one message sent 2 years ago. "You make the world less sharp." But the girl who wrote that seemed to have evaporated, and in her place appeared another, sharp as a razor, cold and calculating. It felt as if his whole life had turned into a cruel experiment, in which he was merely a guinea pig, dissected without anesthesia. The next morning, the kitchen filled with the melodic sounds of a popular pop song she hummed with surprising ease and nonchalance. The protagonist, perched on the edge of the guest bed, listened intently, wondering if everything that had happened the night before was just a nightmare, a figment of his imagination. However, his thoughts were interrupted by the vibration of her phone. Not a single buzz, but a whole series of 5 consecutive calls, each of which he scrupulously counted. By the third call, notes of laughter could be heard in her voice during the conversation. The laughter was quiet, muffled, but present nonetheless. It was a completely different kind of laughter, bearing no resemblance to the moments of joy they shared while watching mundane romantic comedies or clumsily trying to master salsa moves. This laughter was different, filled with a carefree spirit, as if some alien force had permeated their world and distorted something sacred, belonging only to the two of them. It was at this moment that jealousy transformed into something more, becoming a question of truth. The protagonist needed no explanations. He didn't make a scene or hurl accusations. Such behavior would only have turned him into another obstacle in her path, a problem to be resolved. Instead, he decided to start documenting what was happening. He saved screenshots of her texts, recorded moments when her phone lit up, and discreetly synced her calendar to his tablet when she wasn't paying attention. At that moment, he still didn't realize exactly what he was looking for, but he was firmly convinced of the need to collect evidence, not for a court case or to present to friends, but to convince himself of his own correctness, to dispel doubts that his suspicions were not merely the product of a sick imagination. One Friday, she mentioned her intention to attend an art masterclass in the heart of the city. According to her, it would be a 3-hour immersion into the world of watercolor painting. Seeking to somehow mend their fractured connection, he offered to drive her. In response came a smile that seemed too strained and fake. "No, dear, you'd be unbearably bored." That address, dear, had long vanished from her lexicon toward him, and now it sounded like a drop of acid, corroding the last remnants of his hope. It was then that he decided to follow her. Waiting about half an hour after she left, he got into his car and, maintaining distance, followed her through the city bustle. The journey ended at the side parking lot of an exquisite boutique hotel called the White Fern. From across the street, he watched her get out of the car. In her hands, there were no brushes, no paints, nothing to indicate her involvement in art. Instead, she carried a bag from a lingerie boutique, the very one she had once avoided, considering it too pretentious. At the hotel entrance, a man in an elegant charcoal grey jacket was already waiting for her. From his demeanour, it was impossible to tell they had only known each other for a week. It seemed he knew the colour of the walls in her bedroom, as if he were a part of her most intimate life. He didn't burst in, didn't make a scene. He simply took one picture. A single photograph of them standing together at the hotel entrance, and she was giving him a smile he hadn't seen in 2 whole years. This image was forever burned into his memory. But to ensure his own sanity, and have irrefutable proof of his correctness, he saved this photo in 3 different cloud storages. Late that evening, when she stepped through the door with her hair still damp from the shower, her gaze slid over his figure, frozen at the dining table, as if he were an absurd piece of furniture. "How was your class?" his question came, even and calm, despite the Herculean effort it cost him to maintain that composure. "Quite inspiring," she replied, as she neatly placed her smartphone on the table. "We painted roses." His gaze met hers, and he said, "Interesting. You didn't bring a paintbrush." For a split second, he thought her face distorted, as if a thin crack had appeared in her flawless mask. Only for a moment. Then, with a scoff, she turned away and tossed back, "You're dramatizing everything again." In response, he simply stood up, put on his jacket, and walked out into the night. Not forever, just long enough to plant the seed of doubt in her mind that he might have given up on trying to revive their relationship. The next day her eyes were red from tears. Not in front of him, of course. But the hidden truth revealed itself to him through the surveillance camera footage he had thoughtfully installed around the house a couple of weeks prior, forgetting to inform her. She stood on the porch, gazing at the driveway, furtively wiping her eyes, like someone realizing their seemingly solid world was beginning to crumble. She didn't yet suspect that this was just the beginning, far from the end. Since she wouldn't willingly share the truth, he intended to force her to confront it, gradually, painfully, step by step. And when he completed his plan, there would be no room for carefree melodies on her lips. He decided not to make a scene about the hotel photo. That would have been an impulsive act, just laying all his cards on the table and demanding immediate explanations. But he was no longer interested in empty excuses. He ached to see her come to terms with it herself. He wanted to watch her world shatter, not out of sadistic pleasure, but because after years of denying himself much to meet her expectations, he needed to see what would happen when he stopped being the one holding her house of cards from collapsing. He began to execute his plan, a subtle, precise, and imperceptible manipulation for her. The first step was to cancel automatic grocery orders, which seemed insignificant. But on the third day, she noticed the usual refrigerator stock was missing and asked, "Did you forget to order groceries?" He merely shrugged, feigning absent-mindedness. That evening she had to settle for dry cereal, and she remained silent, but it marked the first crack in their relationship. Next, he began to ignore her messages, not rudely, but simply delaying his replies for several hours, or even a full day. He always remained polite, avoiding coldness in communication, explaining delays with busyness and fatigue. Soon, she began to show concern, asking if everything was all right, to which he responded evasively. However, the turning point came when he stopped showing interest in her life, no longer asking about her day or dinner preferences. He became a mirror, reflecting only the energy she sent his way. Noticing that the attention was no longer focused on her, she began to show signs of distress, desperately trying to elicit a reaction from him. She started making an effort again, putting on lipstick before dinner and showing interest in the documentaries they watched together, though her attention was often distracted by her phone. She even suggested a weekend trip to reconnect, as she put it. It was then he realized she had sensed the chasm created by his withdrawal from the role of the emotionally available husband who always forgave, cared, and tried. That version of him, the one who absolved her guilt, had vanished, and without him, she lost her sense of self. Perhaps his most ingenious move was the one his wife could never have anticipated. He decided not to limit himself to the digital version of the compromising photo. The picture, capturing her with a man inside the hotel, was developed and printed on matte paper. This tangible artifact he placed inside a pristine greeting card. No words, just an eloquent image. Next came the waiting for the opportune moment. It arrived a week later, when his wife mentioned an upcoming baby shower for a colleague in the city. She dressed up, pulled out a perfume she hadn't worn in a long time, and rushed out of the house. In that moment, he placed the envelope in her cosmetic drawer, not overtly visible, but not too deep either, so she would discover it when she was alone with her thoughts and makeup. He didn't seek an open confrontation, preferring to wait it out. That same day, he packed his bags and set off on a 3-hour drive north to his cousin Warren's cabin. Without leaving a note or even turning off his phone, he simply vanished from her sight. He wanted her to be left alone with the situation, with the photograph capturing her entering a hotel room with a man whose name he had absolutely no interest in knowing. Upon reaching the cabin, he turned off his phone, cutting himself off from all distractions, taking only firewood and silence for reflection. He spent 2 days unplugged, allowing events to unfold naturally. He imagined her frantically searching the house, checking voicemail, and perhaps even calling his colleagues. He envisioned the moment she would discover the envelope, open it, and see herself in the photograph. Not a selfie that could be filtered or justified, but stark, undeniable proof. When his cell phone sprang back to life, the screen greeted him with a dozen missed calls and half a dozen text messages. The first messages breathed restrained concern. "Hey, just wanted to check if you're okay. Where are you?" Then the tone shifted. "Were you going through my things?" And finally, a simple, pleading, "Please call me back." There was no reply. He wasn't ready to face the reality yet. The next day he returned to the house, trying to act as if nothing had happened. She was waiting for him at the door, barefoot, looking sleep-deprived. Her eyes betrayed what she had been through, but he saw no tears. She never allowed herself to cry in front of him. "Why did you leave that photo out?" her voice came, quiet and shaky. He walked past her, hung up his coat, and tossed back. "You always said you hated surprises. I thought this one wouldn't disappoint you." She followed him into the kitchen, barraging him with questions he had no intention of answering. "How long have you known? Were you following me? Are you going to tell anyone?" Her voice was laced with haste, tension, and fear. Not of him, but of the potential repercussions. He didn't raise his voice, nor did he make accusations. He simply stated calmly, "There's nothing to tell. It's in the past." Then he filled a glass with water and left her standing alone. After all, their personal drama was just beginning to unfold. That fateful evening, she made a desperate attempt to restore the lost balance in their relationship. At first, her actions seemed almost imperceptible, but behind them lay something more significant. She decided to cook dinner, which had been extremely rare lately, and set the table for two, as if nothing had happened. Chicken marsala, flickering candles, exquisite cloth napkins, everything spoke of her longing for what once was. He watched as her hands, slightly trembling, lit the candles as she sat across from him, as if on some ominous date. It seemed she hoped that the ghost of their former life could be summoned if she meticulously observed the ritual. He remained silent, eating slowly and deliberately. Each bite felt mechanical, as if he were chewing tasteless drywall. "Mid-meal," she said, "so you've known for a while." It sounded less like a question and more like an admission, as if she were testing how deeply the knife of truth had plunged. He put down his fork and looked at her. "Since the first time you said you were tired, but your hair was freshly washed and your phone was on silent." She shuddered, barely perceptible, but enough for him to notice a crack in her carefully constructed mask. She slowly nodded, absent-mindedly stirring the food on her plate, then whispered something she likely hadn't intended to say aloud. "I thought I could control it, that it would remain insignificant. She couldn't even name it. Not a mistake, not infidelity, just it, as if naming it might give it reality. But he didn't respond. He had no desire to help her confess. He was not her confessor. Later that evening, the narrator found her in the walk-in closet, sitting on the floor with her knees tucked to her chest. Her gaze was fixed on a shoebox containing old letters from him, messages he hadn't reread in years. She didn't touch them, but simply stared at the box, as if it contained a long-forgotten version of herself to which access had been lost. "I never wanted our relationship to become a battleground," she said unexpectedly. "I didn't think it would cause you such deep pain." It was at that moment the narrator realized she had convinced herself that her actions were not a form of violence. She apparently believed that leaving a marriage, deceiving, being intimate with another person, and feigning love were forgivable because she didn't yell or throw dishes. In her understanding, because she acted quietly and discreetly, it wasn't considered cruel. So he asked her, "When did you stop believing I mattered to you?" Her head snapped up, and she exclaimed, "That's unfair!" "No," he replied, crossing his arms. "Do you think I didn't notice how you stopped caring about my sleep, how you left the room every time I tried to bring up a topic unrelated to your life?" "I didn't stop caring about you." Then why did you give yourself to someone else, as if I was just a mortgage roommate? Silence fell in response. And then, finally, she whispered, because I wanted to feel desired. This admission was not a surprise to him. What was surprising was how little pain it caused. The next morning, his gaze fell upon the car keys, still resting on the shelf in the entryway. It was clear she hadn't left the dwelling, hadn't gone to work. Instead, she was on the back porch, dressed in the same hoodie as the day before, nursing coffee and gazing at the yard, as if its expanse held the answers to all her tormenting questions. She didn't notice him watching her through the narrow slats of the blinds. It was at this moment that he took his second step. He contacted the management company of an apartment complex located on the other side of town, a one-bedroom apartment, corner unit, no shared walls with neighbors. He didn't even bother to view the place. He paid the deposit and signed the lease, using his middle name, quietly and without fanfare. That same day, he packed one suitcase, taking only the essentials. The rest remained in place, the shirts she never folded. The shoes she used to tease him about wearing too long. The wedding photo remained untouched on the hallway wall. He didn't even turn it over. She didn't deserve the drama. And this time, he didn't leave a note, only a small envelope, neatly placed on her pillow. Inside was a printed screenshot of a bank transfer, half of their joint savings, to the last cent, with a concise message, "This is what fairness looks like." He left the house, trying not to make a sound. No slamming doors, no mournful music, just the quiet click of the doorknob and a faint whisper of a goodbye. And, as he could swear, as the car pulled out of the driveway, he didn't feel like he was leaving home. On the contrary, it felt as if he was finally entering it, entering his own life, full of new perspectives and opportunities. Having left his home, the protagonist hadn't anticipated the silence that would descend. He had expected a torrent of messages, phone calls, perhaps even voicemails, carefully crafted and filled with words of remorse and realization of her mistake. However, the first 2 days plunged into absolute stillness. Not a single contact, not a single notification, just the dreary hum of loneliness in the small corner apartment with beige walls and a leaky faucet where no memories had yet been born. And this was the strangest part. At first, this peace didn't feel like a welcome reprieve. Rather, it resembled the shock after a car accident, when a person, miraculously unharmed, hasn't yet processed what happened. The protagonist continued to wait for her to walk through the door, still wrapped in that oversized hoodie, still carrying that alien scent, but she never appeared, and then the realization came. Dasha, he would now call her by her given name, wasn't seeking a reunion. She was waiting, observing, to see if he would return, broken and humiliated. She mistook his silence for indecision, but she didn't know the crucial truth. He wasn't making a decision. He was merely observing the unfolding events. 2 days after my departure, she deigned to make contact, not through a message or a phone call, but by posting a photo on social media. The picture showed her barefoot in the backyard, the wind playing with her hair, creating a cinematic effect. The caption beneath the photo read, "Still standing." I stared at that post for a long time. It had 12 likes and 1 comment from someone named Ames Manning instead 9. "You always were." I clicked on the username and found a private profile, but the profile picture looked familiar. A charcoal grey jacket, a hotel doorway, the same man who had held her red boutique bag. Weeks ago, I had captured him on my phone, and now he was openly commenting on her posts, as if he'd won. It wasn't the comment itself that bothered me, as much as the fact that she left it visible, untouched. She was either trying to provoke me, or worse, she simply didn't care at all. I decided not to react, and to let it be, but at the same time, I resumed planning. I knew she would check the bank transactions, notice the account split, and start wondering where my half of the funds had gone. So I opened a new account, immediately transferred the money there, and then sent the final transfer to a name she hadn't seen in years, my sister. The same sister Dasha always said was too dramatic and judgmental. Paradoxically, judgmental people come in handy when dealing with liars. Dasha didn't know my sister had been observing everything from the sidelines and was furious, not for me, but for the years she had silently watched her brother slowly being erased from existence by someone who played affection from a script. I gave her access to an old hard drive containing screenshots, GPS records, and emails I had recovered from the trash before Dasha could permanently delete them. And then I waited, because Dasha was not just careless, but arrogant. In the pre-dawn quiet, at 2:12, the phone rang. A message appeared on the screen, concise and direct. "What have you done?" No greeting, no punctuation, just that question hanging in the air. A smirk touched the corner of his lips, because technically he hadn't done anything. Yet, however, someone else had already begun their game. The narrator's sister, likely driven by a sense of justice, posted an anonymous but pain-filled message on a popular relationship forum titled, "When you find out your sister-in-law is cheating, and she tries to play the victim." Dasha's name wasn't mentioned, but it wasn't necessary. The detailed story, like puzzle pieces, formed a recognizable picture. The hotel, the expensive boutique, the painting classes, a certain man in a jacket on a June day, and a husband tired of apologizing for his existence. The forum exploded with comments. Users tried to guess who it was, speculated, took screenshots, and cross-referenced facts. One observant reader even managed to identify the room number at the White Fern Hotel by comparing a blurred background from one of Dasha's Instagram photos. By noon the next day, Dasha's social media pages had vanished, as if they had never existed. That same day, she attempted to contact the narrator, calling him. He ignored the call. Then a message came. "You promised not to go nuclear." The reply was brief and precise. "I didn't. You did it yourself. I just stopped protecting you from the fallout." Silence followed that response. And in that moment, the realization came. This wasn't revenge, but exposure. There were no screams, no insults, no humiliation. There was only truth, set free. And now that the voice of truth had sounded, it would be impossible to put it back into silence. On that memorable day, when she first timidly knocked on the door of his apartment, he remained steadfast and did not answer her call. And it wasn't out of fear or resentment or a desire for petty vindication in some trivial quarrel. He simply wanted her to feel, if only for a brief moment, what it was like to be alienated from something that was once hers unconditionally. According to the surveillance camera thoughtfully installed above the door, she stood in anxious waiting for about 15 minutes. She didn't give in to tears, didn't utter a single sound of despair. She simply stood motionless, like the silhouette of someone who had suddenly realized that silence could be a sign of something irreversible. The next day, she did not reappear, but the world around her, like a disturbed beehive, buzzed with renewed intensity. Screenshots of the scandalous discussions from the internet forum leaked into the circles of their mutual acquaintances, quiet colleagues from work, distant relatives. Even her Pilates instructor, guilt-ridden, sent him a message with the succinct text, "I'm truly sorry. I should have opened my eyes sooner, months ago." This blow was more painful than he could have imagined, not because he needed someone's validation, but because it meant that many had witnessed what was happening, but chose to look away, believing he either knew everything or simply didn't want to know. This is one of the bitterest truths about infidelity, rarely spoken aloud. The pain is caused not only by the deceptive partner, but also by all those who silently observe their betrayal. The silence of witnesses is sometimes more deafening than the act itself. But he did not succumb to the temptation to retaliate. He did not publish incriminating posts on social media, did not engage in arguments, and did not justify himself. He allowed Dasha to immerse herself in the vacuum she had created around herself, knowing that now every one of her movements would be scrutinized under a microscope. He stopped shielding her from the consequences of her own actions, and it turned out that without his silent protection, which safeguarded her reputation, only gaping cracks were visible in her. Just 3 days after the deafening scandal, a new call came, which he finally answered. Her voice was muffled, as if coming from a distance. There was a detachment in it. "Do you think this makes you stronger?" The question hung in the air. He paused, letting her feel the weight of those words, and replied, "No, I think it makes me honest." A derisive snort followed, devoid of its former confidence. "Do you know how much I've lost this week?" her voice asked. "You mean attention?" He countered, hitting his mark precisely. A brief silence fell, and he thought she had hung up, but then she spoke, slower this time. "You're acting like you've never made a mistake yourself." And it was that phrase that stuck with him the most, not her defensiveness, not her absurd accusations, but those very words, as if her betrayal was meant to offset some imaginary sins he had never committed. "What exactly did I do wrong, Dasha?" he asked. "Forget to change the oil in your car on time, not notice your new haircut. Love you too quietly until you ran out of reasons to respect me?" Silence, he continued, "because if you're looking for excuses, you'll have to come up with a better story than 'you just didn't inspire me anymore.'" The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was clean, like a surgical cut. And then she said something that surprised him. "I want to see a therapist to understand what went wrong." He didn't laugh, didn't yell, but simply replied, "I already understood everything." She asked what he meant, and he told her the truth, that some people cheat not because they are unhappy, but because they cannot handle love without chaos, that she needed constant drama to feel alive. And when he gave her peace, she turned it into emptiness. "You didn't love me wrong," she whispered. "You just loved me in a way I couldn't reciprocate." And there it was, the most honest thing she had said in 3 years. He ended the conversation without bitterness, without dramatic goodbyes, simply stating, "Please, don't come here any more. There's nothing to reconstruct here." And then, like a shadow from the past, she reappeared. But this time her target was not him, but his sister. That ill-fated weekend, his sister called him in a state of extreme irritation, reporting that Dasha had dared to knock on her door, demanding to clarify the situation. His sister, without ceremony, advised her to clarify the sidewalk in front of her house. When the uninvited guest ignored her words, his sister handed her a sealed envelope. The true content of this message remained a mystery to him until late that night, when he finally managed to examine its contents. Inside was a printout of a group chat whose existence he had not previously suspected. Several of Dasha's friends participated in this virtual gathering, and one of them, likely driven by a sense of justice, decided to share this information. The messages, dated several months earlier, were a series of screenshots in which Dasha proudly boasted about how cleverly he had been turned off his brain, made sarcastic jokes about the hotel weekend, and bragged about her ability to teach him how to disappear without a fight. It was the last phrase that made his hands tremble, but not from pain or disappointment, but from a feeling of triumph. For memory can play tricks, motives can be distorted, but screenshots are irrefutable proof, a gospel of truth staring at the line about how he would disappear without a fight, he said aloud, addressing the void. You were right about one thing. I did disappear, but the fight, it's only just begun. He hadn't expected her to dare show up at his office. After the incriminating screenshots were revealed, after everything that had happened, her visit seemed inconceivable. But she came, dressed in mourning black, as if grieving the version of herself that never truly lived. She didn't ask to talk. She simply waited silently by the elevator, arms crossed, as if hoping he would descend and magically absolve her of all her transgressions. His colleague, Phil, peered into his office and reported, "There's a woman downstairs, and she's determined to wait for you." He remained silent in response, gazing intently out the window for a long minute, weighing each next move. Then he rose, went to the break room, poured himself a fresh cup of coffee, and settled back into his chair. 10 minutes later, she left the building. That same night, he received a message from her. "Please, just 5 minutes." He left the plea unanswered. He wasn't trying to punish her, nor was he playing any games. There was simply nothing left inside him to give her. All the love he had once harbored for her had burned to ash somewhere between the hotel bill and the cynical phrase about teaching him how to disappear. Now she was just a woman whose middle name he once knew. But the next message made him flinch. "I'm not with him any more." He gazed at the phone screen, not because it changed anything, but because he understood her intent. She naively believed that the problem was her lover, as if by breaking ties with him, she could magically rebuild the bridge to the past. So he replied with the only thing that still mattered to him. "Dasha, it wasn't who you slept with that broke me. It was watching you coldly observe me fall apart without saying a word." She didn't reply that night, but the next morning she posted an old photo on social media, taken 3 years ago at a lake in Montana. In the picture, he was holding a fish he hadn't caught, and she was laughing in the background. The caption read, "There are things I can't fix, but I'll never forget how quietly he kept everything together." The post garnered over 200 likes, including one from her former lover. There was some painful symbolism in that. She was trying to repaint the past in syrupy tones of nostalgia, as if that could soften the harsh truth. But nostalgia without an admission of guilt, is merely manipulation dressed in a pretty package. 7 days later, he received a registered letter containing a typed sheet with no identifying marks. On the page was only one phrase, imbued with deep meaning. "I didn't foresee that I could break you. I was sure of your indestructibility." It was at this moment that it dawned on him that for her, their relationship had been nothing more than an experiment. Her infidelity was not dictated by a surge of passion, agonizing longing, or a fatal mistake. Its purpose was to test the boundaries of his love and loyalty. And when he didn't break as she expected, when he found the strength to rebuild himself in silence, she was unable to mourn what she had destroyed, for she had never truly wanted to lose him. She merely wanted to know how far he would bend before he broke. But he didn't break. He simply disappeared, without fanfare or warning. He vanished into thin air. And now it was up to her to wander the ashes of what she had naively believed could never ignite. A few days later, another letter arrived, this time from a lawyer. She had officially filed for divorce. Without any dramatic scenes or pleas for forgiveness, just dry legal documents, the papers were neatly folded and impeccably clean, signed with her full name, not as Mrs. Merritt, but as Daria Hulbridge, her maiden name. As if he had never existed in her life, he signed the papers, personally took them to the post office, and mailed them, without a return address. He didn't want her to know where he was. She already knew who he had become. A man who had remained loyal longer than she deserved. A man who left quieter than she expected. And a man who ultimately didn't just leave, but vanished through every door she thought was locked. 6 months had passed since their last encounter. No personal meetings, no virtual contact, no accidental crossings. It was as if she had completely disappeared from his life, just as he had once ceased to exist for her, transforming from a living person into a mute piece of furniture, into familiar background noise that required no effort to maintain. And what was striking, he didn't hate her, although he had expected to. He thought bitterness would be his constant companion, but it wasn't. Even the news of her moving to another state didn't provoke a strong reaction. Even when a mutual acquaintance mentioned her new relationship, this time playing out quietly, without drama or public statements, he remained calm. It seemed she had finally understood the consequences of playing with another's soul. But by then, his own healing had progressed further than he could have anticipated. After signing those documents, a transformation occurred within him. There were no cinematic fireworks. Instead, there was a slow, imperceptible return to his former self, to the person he hadn't seen in years, to the one who could laugh without restraint, who could make pancakes in the middle of the night just because, who drew in the garage despite having no talent. He picked up his brushes again, creating unskilled landscapes, sunsets resembling melted ice cream, trees with too many branches. But it brought him joy. It was a reminder that doing something purely for the sake of happiness is a rebellion against a world that teaches you to measure everything by categories of profit and utility. Life had gifted him with new acquaintances, where the focus was not on the past, but on the future. One of these new acquaintances, named Mallory, owned a bookstore near his new home. Their meeting was quite unusual. She found him sorting books by cover color, not by genre. Instead of a reproach, there was laughter and an admission of a similar habit, arising as a way to avoid something. Conversations led to walks, and then to revelations about experiences that seemed long forgotten. By the second week of their acquaintance, he shared the story of his divorce, not wanting to hide his true self, a person on a path to healing. Mallory showed no surprise, simply remarking calmly, "You don't look broken, you look rebuilt." That phrase resonated deeply within him. For the first time in a long time, he truly felt that way, rebuilt, not just patched up or glued back together, but whole, albeit in a new form. Last weekend, he revisited the same lake in Montana, where that memorable photo with Dasha had once been taken. It wasn't a pang of nostalgia, but rather a need to prove to himself that he could return to that place without feeling the old weight of memories. And he succeeded. Standing on the pier, in the very same spot, under the same gentle breeze, he no longer held a non-existent fish. Instead, in his hands was a small canvas with a painting he had created the night before. It depicted only the lake, the trees, and a solitary figure standing on the shore, not waiting for anything, just existing. He left the painting on a nearby bench with a note attached to the back. "Who you were is not a prison. You can be free when you're ready." He didn't know who found the painting, perhaps someone who needed it. The important thing was that he himself no longer needed external closure for this story, because he had put an end to it himself. It was the most peaceful, quiet goodbye of his life.